This is part one of why Judge Vandenorth's panel should not be recognized, and the United States Senate should be recognized as the sole judge of Al Franken's seating. Serious, deliberate, and material violation of Minnesota election laws, but more importantly, of the U.S. Constitution governing election of U.S. senators and House members, have been brought against Al Franken and his campaign for U.S. Senate and party because of the conduct of the 2014 U.S. Senate elections in Minnesota. This violation has taken down a major Minnesota party and threatens Minnesota's long-standing tradition of nonpartisan leagues, independent voters, and candidates and third parties. And as famous as Vandenorth is becoming for destroying religious liberties on behalf of the DFL legislators and party leaders, he is not the judge here. He is an officious intermeddler, pretending he has some business keeping from the real judges, 100 members of the U.S. Senate, yes, including SNL's Al Franken, who should recuse himself, are the real judges. Because this involves who is the membership of the constitutional body, the United States Senate, in 2014. This is not a matter for petty judges to exert their power and interfere in the people's business. The Constitution gave authority to the Minnesota State Legislature to construct a system of elections for 2 U.S. senators and 8 U.S. House members. This authority does not come from John Vandenorth, a Chicago man who is leading the destruction and persecution of the church in Ramsey County, nor does the authority come from the district court judges appointed by Lori Gildea, who was elected by you, Minnesota voters, to sit as Chief Judge of the Minnesota Supreme Court. Chief Justice Gildea lacks the authority. But the serious, deliberate, and material violation by Franken and of his so-called election is not just a collection of procedural laws that were broken and laughed at by high-handed jurists and the Georgia Democrat put in charge of Minnesota elections, Mark Rich. And I want to expose very clearly just how jerry-rigged our federal elections are and why this is a threat to American democracy. It is every bit the threat that Minnesota voters have seen in supporters of communist forms of government in our own state's past. I'm going to make a series of videos about our Minnesota political parties, especially the Farmer Labor Party and the Democrat Party. I am the 2014 nominee of the Minnesota Independence Party. In the 1940s, when Gene McCarthy, a St. Thomas University, then called college professor, seized the House seat I ran for in 2010 and 2012, nearly 70 years ago. The Farmer Labor Party was a radical statewide third party who used election laws and the right to vote to take over the state leadership of the Democratic Party. They could not do that today, as Lori Sturdivant, a South Dakota native who writes about the political system for the Star Tribune, explains, because they use a system of proportional representation, which gives women control of the DFL. But with other quotas, because proportional representation is a quota system, white men like me, maybe you too, are reduced in our voting because of our gender, our sex, and our race. And even because we're not homosexuals, those of us who are not. I can assure you that when Gene McCarthy joined Orville Freeman, Walter Mondale, and Hubert Humphrey to throw out the communist, quote-unquote, Farmer Labor Party, yes, there were communists leading the party, and take control of the 4th Congressional District and others until the present day. In those days, when the Democrats relied on the United States Constitution and not jerry-rigging and comedians, in those days, a dedicated cadre of homosexuals could not have overthrown the government by rigging the elections, nor could the self-enlightened Women's Party of the DFL have done so. And there was no predetermined block of minority voters or any other groups that would give us the worst kind of divided government. In 2014, and since the first decade of the present millennium, Democrats in Minnesota, the so-called People's Party, gave us this kind of divided government, and it is a monkey on Minnesota's back. It's run by people who came out from New York, or Ohio, or Georgia, or the Dakotas to run our system for us. But it is based on divide and conquer. It is based on undermining our American way of life and our Constitution. And it's protected by Lori Gildea and her court, and by Judge Vandenorth. You won't read about it in the newspaper or hear about it on At Issue or Almanac or other supposedly responsible journalists. They hide and protect this quota system. Lori Swanson, whom you decided to elect as Attorney General of the state, is the lead protector of that quota system, which, by the way, is even bigger in California, where 12% of the Democrat voting delegates have to be homosexual, 26% Hispanic, and of course, more than half women. It's bigger in Texas, and it's spread all around the nation. It violates the U.S. Constitution. These groups, as the DFL Constitution calls them, clearly violate the 14th Amendment's prohibition of suspect classifications. These are classifications based on race, sex, real or imagined, based on race, or even national origin. Exactly what the U.S. Constitution does not allow you to do. But the Democrats, beginning with Walter Mondale, Hubert Humphrey, Don Fraser, and George McGovern, have come up with it. A bad seed planted in our Democrat Farmer Labor Party and spreading all across the nation. Your Constitution has been replaced with the DFL Constitution, which gives control of the state's elections to women and other demographic interest groups. And they have a clear shot to the general election ballot, which they are taking away from independent voters in the Minnesota Independence Party. We have had that clear shot. But right now, Vandenorth, Gildea, Franken are trying to take that away. Now, taking away my right to vote in the DFL primary, which Franken's party has done. I can't vote in the DFL party primary or state convention because of my sex, because of my race, but because of my sex is a violation of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And taking that right away because of my race violates another amendment that protects me, not just blacks, the 15th Amendment. So you wonder how a loner like Barack Obama can get in the White House and start running wild, kind of White House gone wild? Let me tell you, even with Obama, we have not seen the worst of this Democrat jury-rigged democracy. How will they sell Hillary? With gender quotas. And they'll try to get the race quotas to go along with Hillary, and then they will stress identity politics and attacks going into 2016, as we're already seeing, attacking the Tea Party leader Steve Scalise as House Majority Whip because he addressed a group of voters decades ago. Supposedly that group wants all non-white people to leave America. That's what they say in the Washington Post. The point is, it's game on for race politics, for gender politics, for anything that will divide America and tear down the Constitution and this type of politics. I have to tell you, I did not know the extent of how rigged our state's politics are until I got involved in 2010 directly. I wanted to focus on the issues: jobs, national security, economy, foreign policy, education, family rights, religious liberties, the Constitution. But the most deadly effect of this poisonous network cast by Democrats is precisely that candidates and voters cannot address the important issues of the campaign because the Democrats have a stranglehold on the throats of Minnesota voters. The Republicans, well, they won't fight back, and instead they fight against the voters themselves, ignoring us. So in Minnesota, in the DFL party, we have group rights, not individual liberty, guaranteed us in the U.S. Constitution, which is similar to the system of another Democrat hero, Fidel Castro. The Democrats act like they can just assimilate the American communists in Minnesota, and now they'll assimilate Fidel Castro, a revolutionary communist. L. Franken follows the Castro model, as I described to the Vandenorth Democracy's dead-end court Castro thinks it's democracy if all the Cuban communists can gather in a large meeting, and he can consult with them. And then he'll go away and make all the Cuban decisions indefinitely until he comes back and consults with them again. This year, because of the divided government of the Minnesota DFL and their straight shot to the general election ballot and Washington, D.C., Al showed up for the socially engineered, genetically engineered DFL Democratic people, as Castro calls them. He consults with the Democratic people. And they laughed and they cheered, consulted as to how to beat the Republicans, and they stole our democracy. It's an odd juxtaposition because the Democrats have crashed on the rocks nationally. Al Franken should have a violin and be fiddling while America burns. Of course, with his party, we'd have a whole orchestra fiddling. The Democrat Party and in Minnesota, the DFL. Remember, the Democrats, led by Freeman and Humphrey, assimilated the Minnesota communists in the Farmer Labor Party. So we'll have not just Nero, but Al Franken's dance band. And America is burning. With this wild, wacky world of politics in the Democratic Party, Obama's people, with Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar's full-throated support, are running around the nation, burning down buildings, attacking the police, and this is a huge sea of unemployment and despair. You can't blame this stuff on George Bush, but you can trace it back to the strangulation of the U.S. Constitution by Lori Swanson, Mark Ritchie, Betty McCollum, Ken Martin, and, well, Al Franken, I guess, shucks, as Al might say. So why is this important? Hey, what's wrong with a proportionate, which means more than half, representation of women in the DFL precinct caucuses, and all the way up to the state convention and national convention, and Washington? Let me be clear, nothing is wrong with that, except if it is imposed by the Minnesota State Legislature, except if it's imposed by the Democratic National Committee and Walter Mondale and Don Fraser and Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern, except if it's very important to Barack Obama, as he rigged the presidential elections of 2012 in California, that the California Democrats have this homosexual quota in place there. That's how he steamrolls Democrats, is with their own race quotas. As Obama exclaimed in 2008, they don't understand that the ground is shifted below their feet, or beneath their feet. So is he some kind of Swami or prophet? No, he's talking about rigging the Democratic Party, so its misguided elite can take over the nation and hold it indefinitely, even if the people retake the full Congress, which we have. In case you haven't noticed yet, this Obama one-man show is very dangerous to our society and government, very dangerous. And to the senators who are receiving this information, because Mark Ritchie provided me with the name and address of the Secretary of the U.S. Senate, and I sent it before Christmas. This is not just about Al Franken. It's not even just about Minnesota. It's not about parties. It's about the destruction of the foundations of democracy and a Democratic Senate body, a constitutionally created body. As Justice Miller said in Ex parte Yarborough in 1884, if this government is anything more than a mere aggregation of delegated agents of other states and governments, including Minnesota, each of which is, however, superior to the general government, to you, the Senate, then the Senate must have the power to protect the elections on which its existence depends from violence and corruption. If it has not this power, it is left helpless before the two great and historical enemies of all republics, open violence and insidious corruption, unquote. Well, this contest is about corruption, widespread, insidious corruption, and this quota system, which denies voting rights based on gender and race, is one of the foregrounds. You are addressing gridlock. Senator Franken, as I said in the general election to the media, but not a debate audience, I was blocked from that, is the leader of gridlock in Washington. He's not in a position to do it this year, but he sure does have Minnesota gridlocked. And while I wish all the best and will follow developments in the Senate closely, this gridlock is taking away our voting rights. Franken is leading a war on voting rights. This is one reason he must not be seated. You are established by the U.S. Constitution. You are not the result of media and money-driven campaigns to select mere delegated agents from Minnesota. You are being debilitated rather than renewed by the strangulation of the First Amendment and voting and election rights, which are fundamental to democracy, not only in Minnesota, but across the country. This case is before you, and I urge you to be the guardians of democracy. This is insidious corruption, and it's just a piece of it. Part 1. And open violence has been exhibited as part of this Democratic Party's election strategies in 2012 with Trayvon Martin and 2014 with Michael Brown, and its leader as President Barack Obama. This cannot be the origin of our U.S. Congress, the streets, mayhem, violent divisions, while our security around the globe falters and our ideals are sullied. You must exercise this power. As Miller said of your body, if it has not this power, it is left helpless before the two great natural and historical enemies of all republics, open violence and insidious corruption. I ask that you use your power, even if you disagree with me. Look at this election contest and look at the serious, material, underlying issues that threaten American democracy that shore it up. Thank you for watching Part 1.